Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm George Collier, Deputy Director for the Broadband Infrastructure Office. I'd like to welcome the broadband providers on this webinar, as well as our partners at NCDOT. The purpose of this webinar is to have DOT present on the encroachment processes for broadband deployment. During this webinar, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. However, we will require you to use the Q&A feature on WebEx. Our partners at NCDOT will attempt to answer as many questions as possible within our allotted time. By typing your questions, we can have NCDOT respond to any relevant unanswered questions. And finally, we ask that you ask any questions related to the topic of this webinar. So as you know, one of Governor Cooper's priorities is closing North Carolina's digital divide, and our office is working to develop and roll out the many broadband infrastructure programs under the $1 billion in ARPA funding appropriated in the state budget in November of 2021. Along with these deployments, we're also planning for the funding coming through NTIA's BEAD program under the IIJA. We know that these programs are providing unprecedented opportunities for broadband investments in North Carolina. We cannot successfully roll out these programs without the partnerships of our broadband providers. We understand our provider partners have significant challenges in terms of capacity, volume of projects, and supply and labor chain delays. We know that within these infrastructure build projects that streamline permitting processes that are easy to understand and implement are critical to the timely deployment of broadband. We appreciate NCDOT partnering with us on this session today. The utilities unit of NCDOT will be walking you through their permitting processes. The Division of Broadband Equity, the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity at NCDOT is committed to maintaining close coordination with DOT at this unprecedented level of broadband deployments that are rolling out in the next couple of years. The NTIA is actually making announcements this morning in North Carolina about the new BEAD and digital equity programs and those funding opportunities. Our Deputy Secretary, Nate Denny, and our Director, Angie Bailey, send their regards and thank you all for participating in this session. Nate and Angie have been in close conversations with NCDOT around coordination, and our Director Angie and Keith Conover on our team have recently implemented bi-weekly meetings with the utilities unit at NCDOT. We will be sharing information on awards as they are made so DOT field offices can best plan and prepare for the increased volume of permitting applications. So we appreciate you joining us today, and I will introduce our network analyst on our team, Keith Conover.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Keith Conover, and it's a pleasure to see everyone. A lot of the names I'm recognizing on the list of attendees. I have been doing this work for almost 10 years now, working with providers to try and get broadband where it is not. And we have a huge opportunity. And part of the process is to try and engage and communicate around how both the DOT and DIT, the Broadband Infrastructure Office, can help facilitate and support broadband deployment, because without the providers, we don't have deployment. My background is in broadband deployment myself. I worked for AT&T, Bell Atlantic, and Verizon for 27 years. During that time, I was an engineer where I worked closely with the DOT on things like road widenings, new developments, and there was that one time when a contractor put a couple guardrail spikes through our fiber cable. I'm joking. It's funny because we count on our sales teams to sell sonnet rings and fiber rings, and we didn't need one that day. So just a little bit of bad humor for you to kick us all off. It's my pleasure to work with anybody that I can, and I look forward to helping in any way that I can. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry Sanders, who is going to present from the DOT. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Keith, for that introduction. Let's see here. I got to share my screen on here. There we go. All right. I believe you should be able to see my screen this time. My name is Larry Sanders. I am the state encroachments engineer for NCDOT, and I support over 55 field offices at DOT, 38 district offices, and then all of our 14 division offices throughout the state, and then also our utilities unit in Raleigh. When it comes to encroachments, we consider them we consider encroachments more than occupancy in the right of way, as we must maintain positive working relationships with our partners. Installations in the DOT right of way are in accordance, should be in accordance with NCDOT specifications. And when that happens, it's beneficial to both the encroaching party and NCDOT. The proper location of utilities installed in the right of way, according to our specifications, offer the following benefits. It's a safe location for the traveling public. It's also utility construction, also for the utility construction process, and also after it's installed for maintenance. Another benefit is that it reduces the risk of damaged lines due to maintenance by the utility owner or by NCDOT road maintenance when you have to go out and maintain our roads and ditches. And lastly, it reduces costly relocation due to construction projects. Let's discuss some of the process for encroachment. Some of you may already be familiar with our permitting process, and some may not. And so I'd like to just cover some of those things. If most of our requests are approved at the local district offices, about 95% of those, and they vary in approval time based on which district, because some district offices have a higher volume than other offices. And then secondly, if a review requires approval in Raleigh, meaning my office, because it's in controlled access right of way, or because of some other issues, then by default it comes to my office. So that can delay a permit approval. Third reason that affects the approval time is if a proposed installation is within one of our DOT proposed projects, whether that's in the planning stages, design stages, or if it's under construction. All that becomes a factor in terms of how long it takes to get an encroachment approved. And then lastly, if any required revisions need to occur in the documents that are submitted. So that occurs for our encroachment agreement forms if they're submitted incorrectly, and also for the plans or any other documents that are required for these submissions. The statewide average to approval is about 3 weeks. However, more urban areas have higher volumes and thus longer approval times compared to more rural areas of the state. Our busiest office is Wake County and typically averages about 8 to 10 weeks before approval. If other circumstances apply, then expect a longer approval time. One other thing I'd like to point out is don't submit all locations at once. Rather, submit encroachments based on your company's priorities. NCDOT is processing for all utilities, not as well as non-utilities, for encroachments. So, and not just telecommunications. We are serving the customers of NCDOT to extend valuable services by way of encroachments to citizens and businesses in North Carolina. In doing so, we do not prioritize the submittals other than the order received. So keep that in mind when submittals get given to the DOT. What gets an encroachments process faster? That's always a question we hear. Some of the biggest issues are complete and correct documents. Have to make sure the encroachment agreement form has the right signature on it, that it has a corporate seal if that applies, and then have all the right supporting documents when applicable, and then foremost is having good plans that are submitted. So that way the DOT office can go ahead and review and approve those. Otherwise, we go back and forth with the encroaching party. Another one is to avoid installations within active NCDOT projects. There's a link here that you can go to and check out where our STIP projects are. That doesn't mean don't submit an encroachment if it involves that. It just means that can be a delay for your deployment if it involves one of our construction projects. And it also depends on where our project is at in the process. I'm going to start moving a little bit quicker, as many of the following slides contain a lot of text. So you can read on your own, because this session is being recorded, so you can come back and check on it another time. So the first two forms in this list of forms are used for individual encroachments. And the last four are blanket encroachments. Now, all encroachments are downloadable at the link shown on this slide. This screenshot shows the first of those encroachment agreement forms. This is our 16.1 form, and it's designed for installations along primary and secondary highways, meaning non-controlled access roads. And then the 16.2 encroachment agreement form is used for individual installations along interstate and other controlled access highways. Some may wonder what a controlled access highway means. So the 16.2 form applies for fully controlled access highways, such as interstates. And when that occurs, those are only allowed to generally perpendicular crossings. And then we also have partial and limited control access highways. Control of access refers to limitations on street driveway and public street access. The 16.2 form, the difference here is it shows the interstate and other control access highways. The 16.3 and the 16.3A, they are blanket agreement forms, and they are designed for specific methods of construction. One is for plowed-in telecommunications, and then the other one is for trenched-in telecommunications. They are limited to the provisions that are listed on the agreement form, but if a company does not have that in place, feel free to contact my office to obtain these types of agreements. And then once you obtain that agreement, then it gets submitted to our local district engineer's office with a set of plans for the proposed installation, so that and then our district office approves those. Another one of our blanket agreements is for underground service connections. And this form is intended for connections to adjacent property owners or to a customer from an existing distribution or feeder line running along the NCDOT right-of-way. The district office approval and or notification is not required under this agreement. This is the only one that's not required for notification and approval from the DOT. However, provisions in the agreement form still apply to all installations, including proper traffic control. Safety is one of our big issues at DOT. 16.5A is similar to the underground service connections. This is intended for an aerial installation when an underground service connection cannot be made. And because of lane closures, the blanket agreement submissions must obtain written authorization from our district engineer prior to construction. The only one that doesn't apply was that underground service connection. Everything else requires a written authorization from our district engineer's office. All initial blanket agreements must be submitted to my office, the state encroachment engineer, to get established. These blanket agreements also require a continuing indemnity bond prior to issuance of the blanket agreements. Any work, meaning plans or proposed work performed under the auspices of a blanket agreement, must be submitted to the district engineer along with a copy of the blanket agreement. Contact the respective district engineer as practices vary for preferences using the encroachment permit site versus handling via email. The two links that are shown on this screen should help you locate the right DOT office. So these are available for you to contact our field personnel. So some people ask, when does an individual encroachment apply versus a blanket agreement? If horizontal directional drilling is involved, by default, an individual encroachment must be submitted. If all provisions on a blanket agreement cannot be satisfied, then an individual encroachment agreement must be submitted. Refer also back to the previous slides so you can understand when a blanket encroachment agreement applies and when an individual encroachment agreement must be applied for. If you have any questions, you can also contact our district engineer's office, the local ones there. Bonds may be required for encroachments and at the discretion of the local district engineer. However, continuing indemnity bonds are required for blanket encroachment agreements. The appropriate bond form should be submitted when required from the bonding company of the choice of the encroaching party. The amount of the bond required is determined by the district engineer for individual encroachments and by my office for continuing indemnity bonds. The bond forms are available for download at the link shown here. For utility owners and contractors who do a large amount of work, this is where continuing indemnity bonds apply. So typically the larger companies would want to get a continuing indemnity bond to apply to all encroachments that get submitted to the DOT. Any lump sum that covers any work at a given time for the same company, that applies for continuing indemnity bonds. And these bonds are filed in my office, but they're available to all of our field offices. Let's talk about some common mistakes that often translate to delays in approvals that are submitted to the DOT. So on the forms, one of those is the date field is already completed. That should not be done. The absence of signatures or the unauthorized signatures, that can be a problem in posing a delay. There are guidance in our utilities accommodation manual about that. And then lastly, one of the mistakes on the forms is the incorrect form gets submitted. We also offer a checklist to help customers of the DOT with the encroachment agreement forms. See the link here on this slide. And so what are mistakes on the plans? An absence of the right-of-way line, absence of measurements from certain DOT features like pavements, bridges, culverts, either horizontal or vertical, and including aerial or buried installations. Absence of a measurement from the edge of pavement and or from the right-of-way line. Other absence of things that we see on a common basis is absence of a north arrow, vicinity map, existing drainage features that are out on site, that are typically visible from aerial imagery, NCDOT structures like walls, culverts, bridges, lane configurations and pavement widths, and driveways and other roads. Those things are oftentimes helpful in the review process. Other mistakes include not specifying approved products for use in the DOT right-of-way. For vaults and handholds, it's pretty common and easy for DOT personnel to approve something when our approved products list is specified on the plans for the vaults and handholds. And so here's a link to get a list of those approved products. And if you don't have one that you want to use, there is a way to do that as well. So here's a link to get a product evaluated and added to the NCDOT approved product list. Other mistakes, if you're using HDD, horizontal direction drilling, the following documents are also required. So this can be helpful in the submittal process. If you get a soils report from the USDA website, a frac out plan, and the HDD equipment specs. And we also offer the requirements to help customers with the encroachment plans. So that a link to this document is on this slide. And finally, we also offer a plans checklist. And this is yet another document to help customers through the process. It can be helpful to submit this document with the encroachment. It's not required, but it can be helpful for parties working with DOT to get your encroachment submitted faster. And please note that anything that gets submitted to the DOT in our website should be in a PDF format. Moving on, we do require traffic control plans associated with the encroachment to make sure that safety is being covered for not only the workers in the right of way, but also the traveling public. And so sometimes we do require PE sealed traffic control plans in special circumstances. Overall, guides for traffic control is available in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, oftentimes referred to as the MUTCD. And for telecommunications installations, the DOT publishes our standard specifications and standard drawings. And part of the standard drawings includes a section on standard traffic control plans. And oftentimes the specific circumstances for the type of highway, whether it's divided, a divided highway or a 5-lane section or a 2-lane section, those types of traffic control plans are found in our standard drawings, and that can be used oftentimes and are acceptable for use for traffic control applying to encroachments. The Utilities Accommodation Manual is an invaluable resource for policies, procedures, minimum design criteria, and various other criteria for installing utilities in NCDOT right-of-way. To be clear, NCDOT generally treats and views telecommunications infrastructure as a public utility as long as the installation is associated with a public utility company. So we do have some fiber that's installed for DOT purposes. That's not necessarily a public utility. And then like some university systems where, so they may install something that runs through somebody's front yard, but that's not considered a public utility because that adjacent house does not have access to that line. So that's not considered a public utility. Whereas typically telecommunication companies are trying to get to serve those customers. So those we treat as a public entity. While we discuss the what, let's also talk about how to submit to NCDOT. The link shown here to the online portal started operating in January of 2017. It allows for the submittal, transfer of documents, tracking, and approval. Applicants can see where requests are at any point in the process, and applicants also receive email notifications of encroachment receipt, revision requests, and approval. To get access to it, first the user must request access. And step one in that process is creating a business NCID, which allows the user to conduct businesses with any state agency. This process is not directly associated with encroachments, nor governed by NCDOT. However, a business NCD must be created and then submitted to NCDOT to be able to submit encroachments. User passwords do expire and must be changed frequently. I'm not sure on the details on that, but it might be every 3 months. So if you get locked out for an NCDOT encroachment permit site, try checking your NCID password first. The next step, after you get your nice shiny new business NCID, is to submit that information to NCDOT by the link shown on this site. Please note that user access is associated with each individual's company. So all employees of the same company can view and work with any submittals by the same company. In other words, if a utility owner submits encroachments and also hires a firm to also submit encroachments, the two companies will not be able to view each other's company submittals. So keep that in mind when you're trying to do the processing, and that's how our system was designed. If you need help in the process, always check this website for resources. Some of the stuff we've already covered are links here. So we also offer the encroachment user manual. So once you get access to our website, there's lots of helpful guides in here in terms of how to use our site, on how to set up things to help you as a customer. And it covers the process, expectations, and functionality of our portal. In cases of noncompliance, NCDOT, as a party of the first part on the encroachment, reserves the right to stop all work in the right of way. Reasons to be stopped include incorrect traffic control or other safety concerns, incorrect installation methods or location, and any deviations from the approved encroachment agreement that were not specifically stated in the encroachment approval. That's all I've got on my end. Here's some contact information for me. If you have anything that you would like to contact me about after this presentation. And I'd also like to acknowledge my supervisor, Byron Sanders, the State Utilities Manager, and also Olivia Pilkington are also on this call. Olivia is in our Chief Engineer's office, a staff engineer there. So we'll be glad to take any questions at this time.
Hey, Larry. Everyone, my name is Kelly Gardner. I'm in the communications office for the Department of Information Technology. I'll be asking your questions to the panel today. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A chat, like George mentioned earlier. We are getting a lot of questions, Larry, from folks wanting to know if they could receive a copy of the presentation that you have shown, especially with all the links that you've shared.
Yes, I'll be glad to share that. And I can share the presentation. I think I have a list of all the attendees, or we'll be able to get one, and I'll be glad to send that out as an email to all people after the session.
Okay.
It'll probably be next week.
Okay. Look through the list here. So far, that's the only question we've had. So again, folks, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A chat.
While folks are kind of thinking of their questions, and hi, I'm Byron, the State Utilities Manager for NCDOT. I want to thank Larry for for that presentation. I think there was a lot of good information there. I wanted to make one point of clarification about structures, handholds, and whatnot. Over the years, we've tried to kind of simplify the standard for those structures. And so there is the ability to kind of go through the approved products process, as Larry noted, and as is reflected in Larry's slides. With the last update to the utilities accommodations manual that Larry showed earlier, we've kind of simplified the process and said all structures in the right of way need to be ANSI Tier 22. So if you've got a handhold that is low rated ANSI Tier 22, it does not necessarily need to be on the approved products list in order to be used within the right of way. You should note that on the plans, on your encroachment submittal, so the person that's reviewing that knows what kind of vault that you're using, what kind of handhold you're using, and that it meets that requirement. But hopefully that clarification should limit the amount of additional boxes and types of boxes that are submitted for addition to the approved products list, or confusion about, hey, I want to use a box, but it's not on the approved products list. What do I need to do? So if your box is not ANSI Tier 22 low rated, then you would need to pick something that's on the approved products list or go through a process to get that structure approved. My advice would be pick a box that is on the that is ANSI Tier 22, and that should really kind of simplify the situation for you.
Thanks, Byron.
Thank you for that. We do have some other questions here. Spencer Sabeck asked, is there an as-built resource that shows drainage structures in DOT right-of-way?
There is not an as-built source that I'm aware of that shows those structures. The DOT does publish some information on our GIS website available to the public, and I am not sure if our structures is one of those public-facing items or not. So when I say structures, that includes bridges as well as culverts for for our streams and water flow channels. And so I'm not sure if that's public facing or not on our GIS website, but users can go to NCDOT .arcgis.com and search for all the public facing maps that we produce.
Larry, there is a map that has all of the bridges and culverts, but not one that has just the standard drainage structures, drop inlets and that sort of thing.
Right.
So there is not a GIS map that I'm aware of that gets down to that level of granularity, but there's definitely a map that has the bridges and the culverts and those types of larger structures.
Yeah, our assets unit was in the process of trying to identify all those culverts, but I don't think they ever got through the entire process because there were way too many that were undocumented over the years, and so it was quite an undertaking to get them to do that. So I don't know where they're at in the process, and I'm not even sure that would be shared publicly anyway.
Yeah, and to be more specific, that layer that has the culverts along with the bridges, that would only be the larger culverts. Those are those that are maintained by our bridge department. I think it's any culvert that's larger than 48 inches is maintained by them. But if it's smaller than that, then that wouldn't be reflected on any map that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's correct. I think the distinction for our structures to have to be in our structures management process to be identified there is I think there's a federal requirement for that, and that's how they get on that list as opposed to the smaller pipe culverts, the less than 48 inches or whatever that dimension is. So anything smaller than that does not show up on that large structures list because there's not a federal requirement for them.
Okay, we have another question from Rusty Carringer. Rusty asks, when submitting, do the CDs have to be stamped for a 16.1?
I'm sorry, say it again. Does what have to be stamped?
This may be an acronym I'm not familiar with, but when submitting, do the CDs have to be stamped for a 16.1?
If Rusty could clarify, I'm not sure what a CD refers to. Do you know, Byron?
I do not.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that refers to.
Yeah, Rusty, if you could just clarify in the chat, we'll get to your question in a bit.
They stated construction drawings.
Construction drawings.
Construction
Okay.
drawing. Do they have to be stamped? Good question. Okay, now I understand. No, they for telecommunications, they officially we do not have anything in our policies that require them to be PE sealed. As a general case, there may be some certain circumstances that can be required where we can come back and ask for them to be PE sealed, but as a general rule, telecommunications encroachments, the plans for those do not have to be PE sealed.
If you are there may be instances, as Larry mentioned, if you are coming into close contact with a drainage structure, if you're coming into close contact with a bridge, there may be instances where if you can install your facility kind of within the parameters of our guidelines and you need to do something different, then we would be willing to review that request. But most often we're going to want that to be engineered. We're going to want a professional engineer to sign off on that, to provide some assurances that everything would be okay in that regard. So that oftentimes comes up with kind of exceptions to the rule, especially when you're in close proximity to structures or there's an increased risk associated with the installation.
Okay. The next question, is there a distance limitation for the 16.3 blanket encroachment? Excuse me, the 16.3 blanket encroachment clouding construction?
Good question. The specifications on that particular encroachment agreement form does not limit the distance to use that as a means to install. So that's the answer, the official answer now. However, I can say this as well. If you submit an encroachment that includes, let's say 20 miles of installation, it may take our district office a little bit longer to review that particular submittal. So that's another consideration you may want to think about when you submit something to our district office. In bite-sized pieces, so far as a constructability standpoint is concerned, may be helpful for both the submitter as well as the DOT personnel reviewing that submission. It's for that approval process. So, while a 20-mile length could be submitted and reviewed and could be considered acceptable based on the review process, it may take some time to get through those reviews. So, you just take that in mind. So there's no, magic number, but something that may be more bite-sized for both parties is probably more encouraged in that process.
Okay. The next question we have, when we apply for a 16.5, do we submit per city, county, and what does that look like?
When you submit for a 16.5, the actual agreement form comes to my office and you would specify what county or counties you want to operate in and this applies to any of the blanket agreement forms. Once that gets approved by my office, then a copy of that gets sent back to the encroaching party, and all of our respective district engineer offices also, or field offices, get informed of those blanket encroachments, respectively. So if you're only going to be working in say a few counties in the mountains, then our district offices in the mountains get copied. If you're working statewide, then all district offices get copied. And so when you try to do those blanket encroachment installations, specifically under the 16.5, then it only applies to the counties which are listed on the 16.5 form that gets approved. So so like I said, if you're working in all 100 counties, then request and obtain an approval for all 100 counties. Otherwise, if you don't have one for the county that you're working in, you'll need to go back and request for additional counties to be added to your any existing blanket agreements that you may have on file with us, or you can replace the ones and apply something for statewide. And that's another acceptable approach. But the best way is, contact our local district engineer's office. If you got any questions, they can always help you out with that process as well.
All right, the next question. Do you have KMZ files we can download and use in Google Earth to identify roads? Yeah, to identify the roads.
Yeah, as a general practice, DOT does not, most DOT offices does not use Google Earth and use and offer KMZ files. So no, we do not publish those for any downloads. As an alternative source, we do publish a lot of our maps in GIS format, and that's available on our GIS website. For it's Go Maps is what it's commonly referred to as, but it's ncdot.arcgis.com, I believe, is the website. And so that has our road files. I'm sorry, it has a map of all of our roads in the state, as well as it has our STIP projects, other things that could be applicable to encroaching parties. There's several maps that are available for download and for your use and consumption. And if you have any GIS specialists, they can combine those together to help you out in the process.
Larry, I just happened to be on the site because I was looking at something this morning.
Okay.
It is ncdot.maps.arcgis.com.
Oh, thank you for the correction. Yeah, I left out the word maps.
Okay.
Hey, Byron, could you drop that link into our chat just for reference for the participants on this webinar, please?
I am typing it as you ask.
You are the man, sir. Thank you very much.
The next question here is there a resource for knowing how wide the NCDOT right-of-way is on each road?
Is there a resource for knowing how wide the right-of-way is? No, there is not. Right-of-way is at best inconsistent throughout the state. Our secondary roads commonly have a 60-foot right-of-way, which includes our not only the pavement but also our ditches. But it can vary on our secondary roads, and it certainly varies along the NC routes, the US routes, and the interstate routes. So there's no consistent width along any particular section of road or any standard that applies to those particular highways. So we don't issue a right of way map that shows where all of our right of way exists. Unfortunately, that's something that the DOT has not traditionally kept up with, and so as a result, and part of our encroachment process, we do stipulate that it is up to the encroaching party to actually determine where the right of way ends and begins. And that way, if you get out there on site and the construction crew actually installs something in somebody's yard, and we basically say that it's y'all's determination to figure out where the right of way is and isn't. And so if any complaints or issues come up, then we rely on you to make sure you're doing your job right to install where you say you're going to install, and that you have the actual authority to install there, assuming that it is in our right of way. So that way we avoid any conflicts there. But no, we don't publish anything that shows the right of way. The actual official response to that question, I would refer people to the county courthouses. That's where the official right of way is recorded. And so I know that's a cumbersome process and laborious, and oftentimes people don't do that. Some people do rely on published GIS maps from county tax maps, county tax offices, and other GIS sources. And I think if you look under the hood for any GIS maps that are published by whoever they're published by, you'll see some fine print saying that they do not guarantee that information is correct. And so that would certainly apply to those tax maps that are issued by any county government, and as well as anything that's published by the DOT. We do not guarantee the accuracy of anything that's published in that information. So the right of way is certainly one of those issues that and properties that we really rely on, the companies to do their due diligence in finding out where the encroachment or where the right of way is and isn't. Now, sometimes our district offices do have information on the right of way. If we have some old project plans, you can contact our district engineer's office to see if they might have that kind of information on file. But oftentimes, they may refer you to the county courthouse.
Okay. Next question: is there open data on where we can get the active or upcoming NCDOT projects?
Yes, there is one of the maps that is published has all of our STIP projects, and that's our State Transportation Improvement Program. And there's actually two maps that refer to our projects. So one is the larger major construction projects, and that's the STIP map. And then we have another map that is published. It's called the Highway Maintenance Improvement Program. That's basically refers to our resurfacing projects where we go out and identify roads that need to be resurfaced. And so there are two separate maps, but they do show all of our projects that are currently planned for either in the planning stages, design stages, or currently under construction. And those are available at the same website that Byron mentioned earlier, the ncdot.maps.arcgis.com.
Okay. Next question: is there a process for a provider to share proprietary plans to provide a heads up to the DOT or towns, and where in areas where we plan to do a large build? So let me ask that one more time. Is there a process for a provider to share proprietary plans so that they can provide a heads up to the DOT on towns and areas where they plan to do a large build?
That's an excellent question. Proprietary plans, you can always contact my office or contact our local district engineer's office to supply those proprietary information. But note that if something is shared with us, and if we get we are a public agency, so we don't publish stuff typically, but be cautious that if you do share something with us, and we get audited or requested for public records requests, then we may be required to turn those over. But that's typically an uncommon situation, and specifically in the permitting process, that information is not shared. What becomes public information is after an encroachment gets approved and stuff that gets installed in a right of way. So that technically becomes public information, although it's not published anywhere of where stuff gets installed. So when a company wants to come into say a particular area of the state, whether it's a municipality or could be more than one municipality, I would encourage the company to contact my office and the local district engineer's office to say, hey, we're coming to your neighborhood, and talk through some of the dynamics of what you anticipate doing, how long it's going to you anticipate trying to be there, and give us a heads up to know what kind of because not all towns and not all district offices are created equal. So that can have an impact in terms of how fast something gets approved, and giving our district offices a heads up can be helpful for them to know that something is coming. And specifically, if there can be a way to augment that processing time. So if one office is going to be heavy burdened with a bunch of encroachments compared to a different one, that's something that our field offices would like to know, and possibly if there's a way to staff up to handle that, to handle those additional requests, or if there's another way that we can work with you to get those encroachments processed faster. So I would encourage any company that wants to do something like that to contact us in advance, and we can talk you through the process, help you to try to get something done faster than just relying on our standard process, first in, first out, and it may take a while to get those approved based on current staffing in any particular office. I hope that answers the question.
Next question. Do you look after a certain district or all districts in the state?
Do I look after? That's an interesting question. I think I'd answer that by saying I support all of our field offices. So we have 38 district offices that operate in our 14 division offices. So each of our, they're all, our 14 division offices are based on contiguous groupings of counties. So Division 1, 2, and 3 are on the eastern part along the coast, and then 13 and 14 are up in the mountains on the Tennessee border. So each of our 14 divisions is broken down into either 2 or 3 district offices, again by contiguous groupings of counties. And so my office supports all 14 divisions and all 38 district offices. And some of the encroachments that get submitted, if they happen to be located in one of our projects, there's a separate process for that may involve our division utilities personnel. And so that's why there's the division offices that get involved in these as well. So my office supports all of them, oversees the process. My office is also the gatekeeper for any of the IT issues that occur with our software and getting people access to our site. So if any problems arise, we work with the IT department to resolve those. So we support policy interpretations for all of our field offices. They by policy, some of the encroachments have to be submitted to my office as well, and so therefore we do work with our field offices in that way as well. But I say all that to say this: my office does not supervise any of those field offices. We support them. We do not tell them what to do, and we do not have any direct oversight over telling them what to do. So that's all with the respective district engineer who reports to the division engineer.
Yeah, that's the part that I wanted to just add to that, Larry, because that's a very kind of common question that we get asked. So to put it fairly bluntly, you cannot call me or Larry and say, "Hey, the district, make the district do this." That's not exactly how we're formatted. We do provide that support, as Larry said, and Larry did a very good job of kind of explaining the format. I won't go back over that. But we are not in a position to necessarily override or overrule what is happening in the district and the division offices. Ultimately, the division engineer for that division, to whom that district office reports to, is the ultimate authority for what that district does or does not do. But we are certainly there to support them and advise in a support capacity.
All right. Can the type of encroachments that require a traffic control plan be reiterated? That's the first part. The second part of the question is also, does it need to be a standard plan or road specific?
So two questions on the traffic control. I would say that any encroachment that gets submitted to the DOT should consider having a traffic control plan with it, even if it means copying a certain section out of our standard drawings for our traffic control plans, and that applies to the type of highway. When I say type, think of the cross section of the road. So if you were to cut a slice of the road out, are you looking at a 2-lane road? Are you looking at a 5-lane road? Are you looking at a divided highway? So those are the types of situations that occur, and speed limit also matters as well. So a high-speed road versus a road that is 35 miles an hour. Those types of things matter in terms of traffic control, and so our standard drawings address, I think, most situations in the state. And so it's pretty easy to just copy the right pages out of our standard drawings that apply to the right circumstances where the proposed encroachment is going. And as mentioned earlier, we do reserve the right to require a professionally drawn set of traffic control plans. to be PD sealed. But that's the rare exception, not the common case. So that's the first part of the question. The second part on the traffic control, let's see, refresh my memory. What's the second part again?
The second part, does it need to be a standard plan or road specific?
Standard plan or road specific. There's not a standard road that we have as a DOT, so I think it needs to be road specific to answer the question. So whatever, because one traffic control, not all roads are created equal. An interstate has one type of we have high speeds and certain we control the access on those compared to say a 2-lane road that's going down in a subdivision. So not all things apply equally. So road specific is very helpful when it comes to traffic control.
Next question. What encroachment form should we use if we are working along state roads and do not cross any major highways?
Typically, that would be the 16.1 agreement form. That's for our primary and secondary roads. And that agreement form applies to all roads in the state. The only exception that comes into play with a different form for utility installations is the 16.2 form. That one applies when any controlled access highway is involved. And going to that issue, DOT does publish a controlled access highways map. And so by default, all interstates are fully controlled access. And then other roads in the state can vary somewhere between no control to partial control to limited control to full control, and then back again to no control, and anywhere in between. So like that's pretty common with the U.S. route. As you travel through the state, it can go from a rural area where it could be a 2-lane road and there's no control of access, meaning there's driveways everywhere. And then you get to a divided highway section and it becomes either partial or limited control of access. And then sometimes it can actually become a full control of access. US 1 near south of Raleigh is like that, where it's fully controlled access. But as you travel further down on US 1, or if you come into the city, north of Raleigh becomes Capitol Boulevard, which is driveways everywhere. So it can vary in terms of what type of control we have that applies to any particular segment of road.
And I would add that, oh, I'm sorry, Larry.
No, I was just going to add one more comment that the encroachment agreement that applies to the control of access is the 16.2. So otherwise, the 16.1 form applies to the majority of the roads in the state.
In our utilities accommodations manual has an explanation of those different control descriptions to kind of help you better understand, what's partial versus limited versus full.
And to help people understand a little bit more, because oftentimes telecommunications don't understand what that means. But a practical application of it, if you were to drive along a highway, and most people aren't aware of this, but when we have control of access, typically 99% of the time we will have control of access fencing that delineates that's pretty close to where the right-of-way line is, if it's not actually on the right-of-way line. So so that fencing is out there to as a it serves several purposes, but not only animal control, but also the actual access control for the driveways. And so there's a lot of benefits that are out there. So if you happen to drive along or use a street view map like Google Maps, sometimes you can see that fencing, and that's an indication that there is control of access out there on that highway.
All right, well, we are, it's actually 11:01, so we are out of time. George, I'll hand it back over to you if there's anything you want to add before we leave.
Thanks, Kelly. Again, to all the providers that are joined us for our webinar today. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you to our partners at the NCDOT, Kelly, Byron. I think this was a very, very helpful webinar, and we appreciate your partnership. And we hope that you all have a good weekend, and we look forward to any follow-up questions that you all have. Thank you all.